So the big question, can we end homelessness? And if so, how?
Yeah, interesting. I asked that question to a group of people who were working in the homeless sector. And again, this is mid to small towns in Ontario. And there was a range of responses. Some people said, yes, we can do it. Other people sort of put their hands up and said, I don't know. I mean, can we ever end it completely? I don't think so. So there's a real range of answers to that question, depending who you talk to. But if we're going to tackle it, and I think, what is really needed, number one, is an adequate supply of safe and affordable housing in this country. We don't have this. I mean, just the other day, I was walking in my neighborhood, just walking down a major street in Toronto. It wasn't in an affluent area, and I saw a sign over a store for a 3-bedroom apartment. It wasn't, as I say, just one of these apartments over a storefront on a major, 2-story building, and it was $2,800 for a 3-bedroom apartment. And this was nothing fancy. So how are people who are experiencing homelessness or people who are low income going to afford to pay rent of that caliber? And as we know, there's a waiting list for people to get into affordable housing, to social housing in this province. I'm not sure what the number is now, but last I looked, it was like 120,000 people were on this list. I think that was in the city of Toronto. So clearly we need more, safe and affordable housing. And we also, I think, need a better coordination of systems that are in place that we could hook people up who need this housing to the housing that might be available to them. Oftentimes, they don't know where to go. So I think if they were given the sort of help and given some guidance in terms of where to go to find housing, if it were to be available, that I think would be a great thing. I'm not saying it's not done, but I think more of it should be done. And again, it's back to the question earlier about the lack of coordination of discharge planning. Same thing here. You've got to have services, not just provide them, but have people made aware of where they are, how to get access to them. That's important, I think. And a final thought on that, I think, would be to focus on what often are described as priority populations. And that would be perhaps women who may be fleeing intimate partner violence, Indigenous peoples, families, women with children, seniors, youth. I think you've got to look at housing for people that have different needs. LGBTQ community, for example. I think rather than having one model of housing that fits all, I think we've got to think more carefully that sort of that cookie cutter approach doesn't always work. And I think there has to be more efforts to look at the needs that different groups have in terms of the housing supports that they would need to get off the streets. But just a final thought on that, I think more work needs to be done, and people have been talking about this more in recent years, is on preventing people from being homeless. I think it's easier to prevent it in some ways than it is to try to get people, especially chronically homeless, off the streets into supportive and safe housing. So I think that's a direction that I'm really keen on, is trying to support homelessness to start with. People who are evicted often end up homelessness. Let's try to have programs to prevent people who are evicted from just having nowhere to go. So things like that, I think, need to be thought through more closely, more carefully in Ontario and throughout the whole country, for that matter.